Okay, Mr. President, President Peter Manzano, may we now call you to call this meeting to order. President Manzano, Peter.
Thank you, PP Tito. Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians, lovely aunts, and guests. I now call this 33rd regular meeting of the Rotary Club of Makati to order.
All right, so we would like to now call our uh, our introducer of the guest speaker. May we call on Attorney Howie Calleja. The
So
President.
thank you, Tito. Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians, friends, and guests. This afternoon, I would like to introduce our distinguished speaker, who is pretty well known to all of us, even without me mentioning his kilometric biodata. Anyway, he is very well known with all his achievements domestically and internationally. He has distinguished himself in the service to our country, both in the private sector and in government. Recently, we have seen our speaker in the highest service of our country by being a true patriot in not only winning the arbitral award in favor of the Philippines, but more so in his continued fight for Philippine sovereignty and Philippine sovereign rights over the West Philippine Sea. Fellow Rotarians, friends, and guests, it is my privilege to introduce to you one of the lead conveners of Isang Bayan, a true gentleman and a statesman, Ambassador Albert F. Del Rosario.
Thank you very much, Howie. I am very grateful, and again, I find myself in a paradox because when I was with the government, I knew a lot, but I could only say very little. Now that I'm back in the private sector, I know very little, but I'm being asked to say a lot. Mr. Peter Manzano, President, Mr. Fred Marungao, past President, of course, Howie, my good friend Howie, Mr. Tito Panlilio, past President, and Mr. Rando Taro, Chief of Staff, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is our belief that every citizen of this world has a stake in resolving the South China Sea dispute in favor of UNCLOS. By bringing a case against China under UNCLOS, we stood for what is right, and that is why we defended what is rightfully and legitimately ours, using peaceful means in accordance with the rule of law. In pursuing our advocacy, we identified ourselves with states which observe and adhere to rules-based international norms. Moreover, in addressing the most critical security issue in our region, the Philippines positioned itself to successfully demonstrate that right is might, and international law is the great equalizer among states. Thus, we trusted and had been given the assurance that our government will not overlook the fact that it is compelled by the law of the land to fully address the Hague Arbitral Award under UNCLOS. Nearly 5 years have passed since the Philippines legally won the South China Sea arbitration case, which invalidated China's claim to historic rights over resources within the West Philippine Sea. Under the leadership of Xi Jinping, however, China continues to assert its claim in previously disputed waters, the South China Sea, while disregarding the legal victory of the Philippines. Nevertheless, the award has been internationally recognized and used as a basis for rightful claims over the South China Sea and for exercising freedom of navigation. Naval powers such as the US, Japan, and Australia have actively recognized the award with their freedom of navigation and overflight operations, which upholds international law and at the same time undermining China's 9-line claim. The UK, France, and Germany have also invoked the arbitral tribunal outcome. The South China Sea is of tremendous economic and geostrategic importance. It is where a quarter of international trade goes through and where more than half of the world's oil tankers and merchant ships pass every year. The South China Sea is part of an area that has long been known as the greatest concentration.
Oh, there's no volume. There's no sound. The sound got out.
Better? Better?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Better.
You were in the South China Sea, being the half of the sea lanes of the oil tankers, somewhere there.
The South China Sea is part of an area that has long been known to be the greatest concentration of marine life on the planet, where the highest concentration of this biodiversity is actually in the Philippines. Located in the Spratlys are the breeding grounds of fish and other marine life that give food and sustenance to the people of Southeast Asia over centuries. Traditional fishermen and their families have lived throughout these years, relying on their fish catch from these waters. Coral reefs are the single most valuable ecosystem in the world. A hectare of coral reefs can produce a potential value of US $350,000 a year. However, for coral atolls to form, it may take as long as 30 million years to occur. 34% of the world's coral reefs are in the South China Sea, despite the area being only 2.5% of the world's total ocean and sea surface. It may surprise Filipinos that our West Philippine Sea is home to these coral atolls and is one of the richest and most biodiverse ecosystems in the world, bestowed by nature upon us, our ancestors, and upon future generations of Filipinos. What happened in the past few years? Based on the 2016 Arbitral Award, we know that this rich biodiverse region was mercilessly destroyed by China through its illegal reclamation and artificial island building in the Spratlys. Please take a pause to imagine how our coral atolls, which can take 30 million years to form, were destroyed almost instantaneously by China these past few years under the leadership of Xi Jinping. Beginning in 2013, Chinese dredgers pulverized the coral reefs in the Spratlys and used these dead coral reefs and other sediments to create dry land. To the immense detriment of countries bordering the South China Sea, China destroyed these coral reefs to create air and naval bases in the Spratlys for the purpose of enforcing a historically and legally baseless claim over the South China Sea. Given the wanton destruction of these fish homes in the Spratlys, scientists are now warning that this has accelerated one of the world's worst fisheries collapse that may lead into mass starvation in the region. The 2016 Arbitral Award found that based on the compelling evidence, expert reports, and a critical assessment of Chinese claims described above, the tribunal has no doubt that China's artificial island building activities on the 7 reefs in the Spratly Islands caused devastation and long-lasting damage to the marine environment. At this point, what can we do? It seems obvious that we should protect and rebuild the remaining marine life in the South China Sea. The suggestion of Justice Antonio Carpio and other marine biologists to immediately declare the Spratlys as a marine protected area is well taken. If countries bordering the South China Sea agree to declare the Spratlys a marine protected area, this will give the marine life in that area some breathing space to heal. We therefore urge our countrymen, the Philippine government, and our ASEAN neighbors to help us in this endeavor. This also means that we should push back on any destructive reclamation and militarization activities in the Spratlys. If these are not done, Southeast Asia will suffer one of the worst environmental catastrophes in history that will destroy our food and livelihood. Equally important is to demand accountability from the main perpetrators of the environmental destruction in the South China Sea, which is China. Cited in the arbitral award, the overall damage to the coral reefs within the Greater Spratly Islands covers at least 124 square kilometers, of which the People's Republic of China is responsible for 99%. If we do not demand accountability, we embolden rogue countries like China to commit the same malevolent acts in the future, including China's planned reclamation of Scarborough Shoal, another rich traditional fishing ground of Filipinos, the Vietnamese, and even the Chinese. China has long been planning to reclaim Scarborough Shoal to enforce the northeastern part of a 9-dash line and complete its triangle of military control over the South China Sea. Fortunately, despite its de facto possession over Scarborough, China has not yet reclaimed the shoal because the US and its allies considered Scarborough Shoal as a red line that China must not cross. It is therefore in our highest national interest that we exert all efforts to prevent China from committing another disastrous crime by reclaiming Scarborough Shoal. The protection of our country is a duty, protection of our environment rather, is a duty not only of governments but every citizen of this planet. Due to the interconnection of natural ecosystems, and environmental disaster in one area inevitably spills over to other parts of the globe. This is especially true in the rich biodiverse region of the South China Sea. UNCLOS acknowledges this fact by providing in its preamble that the problems of ocean space are closely interrelated and need to be considered as a whole. Even the Philippine Constitution provides that every Filipino, as part of the Philippine state, shall protect the nation's marine wealth. For our part, on March 13, 2019, former Ombudswoman Conchita Carpio Morales and I submitted a communication to the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court to show that Chinese President Xi Jinping, Foreign Minister Wang Yi, and former Chinese ambassador, among others, committed crimes against humanity by, among others, illegally blockading the traditional fishing grounds like the waters around Scarborough Shoal and the Spratlys, causing the near permanent destruction of the marine environment of the South China Sea and placing in jeopardy the livelihood and food security of our people. We subsequently include in our communication executives of China's Communications Construction Company, a corporation which undertook the destructive dredging in the Spratlys. In the words of the ICC statute, these actions of Chinese officials and agents are no doubt inhumane acts, intentionally causing great suffering or serious injury to body or to mental or physical health that must not go unpunished. Towards the end of 2019, the ICC Office of the Prosecutor communicated its jurisdictional concerns to us, and we believe we're able to respond to these concerns with our counsel, Justice Antonio Carpio. We consider the private sector initiative as our contribution to what should be a global effort to protect the South China Sea and demand accountability from China. We pursue this case on the premise that we Filipinos should not sit idly by as China continues to flagrantly destroy our rights. Through our private efforts, we continue to work to protect our country's rights and to make China pay for its atrocities to the Filipino people. We should continue to apply ways that complement our efforts to protect the South China Sea and demand accountability from China. Conferences, forums, and publications in both print and social media remain important because they inform the public about the severity of the South China Sea issue and the appropriate steps that must be undertaken to address it. We need all the help that we can get. The countries bordering the South China Sea are victims of China's wanton environmental destruction in the Spratlys. Governments and all citizens of these countries can file cases before their own courts, especially against Chinese state-owned enterprises, which operate in their respective territories and which are linked to the illegal reclamation and island building in the Spratlys, such as the China Communications Construction Company. For the Philippines alone, the University of the Philippines Marine Science Institute conservatively estimated that we are losing at least $662 million annually from our damaged reef ecosystems due to China's reclamation activities and illegal fishing operations. This sums up to US dollar 4.6 billion since the start of 2014, which is around the time China started dredging until this year. This money can be used to save our fish and rehabilitate the marine ecosystem destroyed by China in our waters. The countries bordering the South China Sea. Hello. Hello.
Yes, sir. You can be heard, sir. Continue.
I can be heard.
Yeah.
The countries bordering the South China Sea, that is Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Brunei, have the right to seize assets and properties owned by Chinese state in their territory as compensation for the crimes committed by the Chinese state against their people. It may also be considered by countries like the United States and Europe, which claim to have been injured by China in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. For the Philippines, these assets may include certain major industries. China can be held accountable here in our country, and our Philippine government, Filipino people, need to stand up for our legitimate rights. China's continuing destructive actions gravely affects all coastal states in the South China Sea, as well as all states in the world, which have an interest in making the region free and open for humanity through freedom of navigation and overflight. It is therefore clear that a multilateral approach is necessary to resolve the South China Sea issue. We recall that when China seized Scarborough Shoal from the Philippines in 2012, China warned us not to internationalize the dispute by referring it to international arbitration, by seeking the help of the ASEAN, or by seeking the help of the United States, which maintains a long-standing alliance with the Philippines under the 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty. Let us call this approach preferred by China as bilateralism. China has always insisted on bilateral approach because it seeks to use its superior strength to separately force each coastal state in the South China Sea to accept its dominion over the region. In other words, China does not want the strength in numbers inherent in a multilateral approach. This is because no law-abiding country will unequivocally support China's 9-line claim. We have, of course, rejected China's bilateralism. We brought a case against China before an international tribunal in The Hague, which resulted in an overwhelming victory for the Filipino people as embodied in the 2016 arbitral award. Our overwhelming victory in The Hague is a vindication against China's unlawful expansion agenda, and its outcome is now an integral part of international law. The ruling upheld the need for a rules-based order over the waters in the South China Sea. It espoused that any claim not anchored on and supported by a clause should be denied. Since then, we have been calling for a multilateral approach through the enforcement of the 2016 arbitral award, which among others found China's blockade of Scarborough Shoal as illegal and that China is culpable for the massive and near permanent environmental disaster in the South China Sea. We continue to make this call, and we hope that our Philippine government and the citizens of the world will help us in this endeavor. Since the award was issued in 2016, we missed the golden opportunity for almost 5 years when the Philippines did not raise the award at the United Nations General Assembly and failed to seek the support of countries in enforcing the award. Whereas the President has inexplicably gone back and forth in his support of the award to the dismay of all Filipinos, we should work on our government to earnestly obtain the support of our country so that the arbitral award can be credibly raised this coming September. We maintain that the award has multilateral support because it benefits the coastal states of the South China Sea, whose lands and seas are encroached upon by China's 9-line. The award also benefits the rest of the other countries in the world like the United States, the European Union, and Japan, because it affirms the freedom of navigation and overflight in the South China Sea. We continue our call to take concrete steps to consolidate support and assistance from the US, Australia, EU, Japan, ASEAN, and other reasonable nations, or other responsible nations, rather. Most of the countries around the world believe in the rule of law and UNCLOS. As a product of UNCLOS, these countries believe that the enforcement of the award is a legitimate process of resolving the maritime dispute in the South China Sea. In the long run, how can 145 littoral states of 193 UN member nations vote against their national interests by going against UNCLOS, which grants them considerable maritime areas and resources they previously did not enjoy? How can naval powers like the US, UK, France, and Australia not support UNCLOS, which upholds their freedom of navigation and overflight around the world? This simple logic should not be lost on us. Again, bringing our case to the United Nations General Assembly will not be a futile effort, as there are successful precedents, as for example in the case of Nicaragua versus the United States, when a settlement was reached approximately 5 years after a ruling by the International Court of Justice. It can be said that Nicaragua won over the United States. Since the USA simply ignored the request for negotiations, Nicaragua then sought recourse from the UN by first approaching the UN Security Council, but its draft resolutions were vetoed by the USA. Nicaragua then went to the General Assembly that subsequently adopted various resolutions calling for full and immediate compliance with the judgment of the International Court of Justice. Nicaragua's resort to the UN had the effect of securing international publicity and of gaining favorable global opinion. The United Nations continued to defy the UN resolutions until later on it ultimately provided a substantial aid package to Nicaragua. When approaching the UN, our humble proposal is for the President to task the Department of Foreign Affairs to formulate a strategy on how the global village of nations can be convinced to take a stand in the rule of law in support of the Philippines. As we had said before, it would take time and hard work, but it can be done by Secretary of Sin, who may wish to enlist the assistance of various retired permanent representatives of the UN. At this point, we need to disabuse some of our countrymen of the outright falsity that standing up for our rights in the South China Sea is waging war against China. Standing up for our rights is what decent men and women do to uphold the rule of law and prevent bullies from having their way. If we allow bullies to have their way, we become complicit in undermining the rule of law, and we consent to a world where only brute strength matters. In the South China Sea, China is the bully because it has no right to hijack an entire sea. China's 9-line claim has been found to be historically and legally baseless by a legitimate tribunal established under UNCLOS. Moreover, China was also found to be solely responsible for one of the biggest environmental disasters in the world when it built its artificial islands in its practice. Yet China remains adamant in forcing its unjustified claims against the world. We're all familiar with China's continuing unlawful activities. These include preventing our fishermen from pursuing their livelihood in our exclusive economic zone, blocking the Philippine development of our natural resources, destroying elements of the marine environment, erecting military facilities, swarming, and ridiculously confronting our president with a threat of war. Surprising as it may sound, according to Professor Amitabh Acharya of the American University in Washington, D.C., war is not even a good option for China. Its economy is heavily reliant on global trade, including its fuel supply, which needs open shipping lanes such as the Malacca Strait and the Indian Ocean, which are dominated by US naval power. Even Wang Yi, China's foreign secretary, believes that war would be self-injurious. Our constitution has clearly tasked our president and military to secure our sovereignty and protect our lands and seas. It is a grave insult to our forefathers who died and fought for our country's self-respect and independence if we only cower in fear before such threats. It is also a grave insult to our children and grandchildren if we give away our waters and territories in the face of such threats. It may be high time, therefore, for our government to assert our rightful position by relying on the skill, courage, and patriotism of our Navy and armed forces, which are capable of developing a credible minimum defense posture against any bully or aggressor, whoever that might be. As we had previously said, we are opposed to war, as we should be. But if threatened by the use of force, we should be ready rather, to inflict at the very least a bloody nose on any attacker who is out to harm us. It is in this light that we also welcome the recent clarification of the US as to when the mutual treaty can be invoked. In 2019, US State Secretary Mike Pompeo declared that the South China Sea is part of the Pacific. Any armed attack on any Philippine forces, aircraft, or public vessels in the South China Sea will trigger mutual defense obligations under our Mutual Defense Treaty. In pursuing a multilateral approach, it is also time that our country develop a minimum credible defense posture. We join our partners in conducting joint patrols in the South China Sea and work to strengthen our alliance with the United States. As a self-respecting country, we need the capacity to protect our territory and defend against external threats like China's incursions, as mandated by our Constitution. To do this, we need to develop our own defense assets and call upon like-minded allies like the US, Australia, and Japan, which share our respect for the rule of law and the values of freedom and democracy. No other nation can support us more than we do ourselves, and there can be no unity over the right course of action unless we initiate this unity. There must be a serious plan to deal with China for the benefit of the Filipino people. In summary, this plan should include: 1. Convincing the President that he must raise the arbitral award again this September 2021 and make sure that he seeks the support of responsible nations to compel China to abide by the arbitral ruling. The people of the Philippines and the people of responsible nations would be greatly saddened and disappointed if he does not prepare to take advantage of his last golden opportunity with the UNGA in September. Number 2, welcoming the position of France, Germany, and the United Kingdom against China's claims in the South China Sea, as provided in the note verbal to the United Nations dated September 16, 2020. France, Germany, and the UK invoked the primacy of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea in the South China Sea and the arbitral ruling won by the Philippines against China. Along with the US, these European nations confirm our position that there is international support for our country's lawful rights in our West Philippine Sea as ruled by the arbitral tribunal in The Hague. The position of France, Germany, and the UK also unequivocally support the will of the Filipino people, as shown in the surveys that our government should raise the arbitral ruling in the UN General Assembly and other international fora. Number 3, taking concrete steps to consolidate support and assistance from the US, Australia, EU, Japan, ASEAN, and other responsible nations. Most of the countries around the world believe in the rule of law. Number 4, making Chinese officials criminally accountable for having inflicted the most massive, near permanent, and devastating destruction of the marine world in the South China Sea. This finding has been unanimously upheld by the award. Thus, former Ombudsman Conchita Carpio Morales and I pursued the ICC case to make China for responsible. We urge citizens of Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Brunei to submit similar communications to the ICC because they too have been affected by China's systematic and wanton environmental destruction. Under ICC rules, any person, even citizens of the US, Australia, and Japan, can submit information and evidence regarding the systematic and wanton environmental destruction committed by Chinese officials in the South China Sea. Number 5, we also need to make China pay monetarily for its crimes. China mercilessly destroyed the breeding grounds of fish and other marine life in the Spratlys. More than half of our country's 110 million Filipinos live in coastal communities, relying on marine resources for their daily needs. Where will we get our food when we run out of fish? As mentioned in the coastal states in the South China Sea, including the Philippines, the Philippines have the right to seize assets and properties owned by a Chinese state in their territory as compensation for the crimes committed by the Chinese state against their people. It is time that our country develops a minimum credible defense posture, rejoin our partners in conducting joint patrols in the South China Sea, and work to strengthen our alliance with the US. According to surveys, more than 8 of 10 Filipinos advocate the need for us to protect our territory and defend ourselves against external threats like Chinese incursions, as mandated by our Constitution. We respectfully urge our government to engage as official government advisor, Justice Tony Carpio, for his unparalleled wisdom, expertise, and sound judgment on the South China Sea dispute. Throughout the years, we have seen that Justice Carpio's work on this issue has always been for the country's interest with the goal of protecting our lands and seas for generations. I have learned, ladies and gentlemen, by first-hand experience that Beijing is not to be trusted and their word is unreliable. When China makes a declaration, you can almost be sure that it's not consistent with what is happening on the ground. Years ago, as the highest Chinese official was promising to his US counterpart that there would be no militarization in the South China Sea, precisely the opposite was taking place. On Scarborough, an agreement in 2012 was brokered by the United States regarding the withdrawal of ships by a certain time in order to break an impasse. We withdrew while China did not. Of great import, our government must listen to its people. Nine out of 10 Filipinos believe that it is important for the Philippines to regain control of the artificial islands built by China in the West Philippine Sea. Similarly, 9 out of 10 Filipinos believe that it is important to strengthen the military capability of the Philippines, especially its Navy. Furthermore, 8 of 10 Filipinos believe that the South China Sea issue should be brought to the UN General Assembly. The SW surveys have also shown that 8 of 10 Filipinos agree that the Philippines should form alliances with countries willing to help defend our rights in the West Philippine Sea. It is time for Filipinos to unite and demand what is due from China. We should not be hoodwinked into giving up our rights by the mere prospect of Chinese money. Seeking accountability for China's atrocity in our land and waters is not waging war against China. It is taking what Filipinos justly deserve under the rule of law. I would just wish to quickly give you one more time positive salient points for the Philippines as awarded by the Arbitral Tribunal. 1. China's 9-line has been declared as being contrary to international law. 2. Our fishermen has a traditional right to fish at Scarborough Shoal, and China must recognize that right. 3. China is traditionally responsible for environmental harm at the South China Sea, caused by its destructive activity, including artificial island building and illegal and destructive fishing. 4. China's actions as mischief-free violate the host of China's international legal obligation. And 5. The reed bank is exclusively ours, as it is well within our EEZ and ECS, and there is no overlap with Ito Aba, which projects only 12 nautical miles. One major purpose of our think tank entity, the Strat-based ADR Institute, is not to work at cross purposes with the administration. Rather, it is to help keep this singular legal achievement of our republic in the public mind, so all the people can explore its full potential for consolidating the international rule of law. I've been asked what the next diplomatic step should be for the Philippines if there were a continued unlawful presence of a large number of Chinese ships in the West Philippine Sea. Undoubtedly, our SFA must have evaluated the various diplomatic options that are available to him, which would include the following. We must anticipate that China will continue their plan to remain in large numbers in the West Philippine Sea. This will be a constant for China in moving forward its expansionist policy. We must have prepared a strategic plan internationalizing the West Philippine issue. We must work closely with like-minded nations. We must have formulated a menu of things to do and how to calibrate them. One possible action to calibrate subsequent reaction is to inform formally the United Nations through the Secretary General. We must have converted the forms of our diplomatic notes into demarches, which are pointed, direct, and purposive. We must plan for bringing our case to the UN General Assembly in September to seek the support of responsible nations to compel China to abide by the Arbitral Tribunal outcome. We had summoned the Chinese ambassador several weeks ago. We can recall our ambassador to Beijing if further action is desired. We can furthermore consider instructing our service post to visit their host government to explain what is happening in China. We can also consider declaring specific Chinese officials as persona non grata, such as the intelligence personnel or the spokesperson. Ladies and gentlemen, the future may be unclear and uncertain today, but fidelity to the rule of law and believing that right is might would buttress a truly independent foreign policy for the Philippines. Finally, how can each of us be helpful? We can help by understanding what is happening, by adding our voices to defend what is ours, and by taking a united stand in upholding the rule of law and doing what is right. Thank you for your attention.
All right. Thank you, Ambassador, rather, Secretary of Foreign Affairs, former Secretary of Affairs, Albert de Rosario. And we now call on our members and guests. Our guest speaker has consented to answer our questions and our queries or clarifications on the issue, on this burning issue. Beforehand, we have requested our members and guests to forward to us possible questions, and I'll start now with the first question. Sir, you proposed that we bring the matter to the UN General Assembly. However, didn't President Duterte bring the issue to the UN already? How different is this to your proposal?
Thank you for the question. We, of course, were very happy when the president finally raised the matter in the South China Sea in his UN General Assembly speech. However, that was it. That's as far as he went. There was no follow through in terms of the specific steps that needed to be taken. Part of the follow through is making use of all available instruments of the UN, including the filing of UNGA resolutions. There was not a single resolution that was filed, which would allow a general debate or the referral to a particular UN committee for further discussion. Putting the subject in a continuing deliberation by the international community would have been a good initiative, and the UNGA was an excellent venue in drawing international attention to this matter.
All right. Thank you. For the second question, would you advise joint patrols where Filipino Navy men will be the one to board and man U.S. Navy ships?
Um, Joint patrols between the Philippines and the US and other willing allies would of course be an excellent initiative. In fact, we have suggested this just before I left government. Joint patrol would have a deterring value. It will also show our resolve and commitment on the West Philippine Sea. Before stepping down as Secretary of Foreign Affairs, I remember, we took 2 final trips to Washington, D.C., precisely to engage the U.S. into considering joint patrols in the West Philippine Sea. This was approved by the U.S., but it did not fly because President Duterte, who was recently elected, took the view that an initiative like this would displease Beijing.
All right. Thank you. Third question, since there have been massive destruction of corals and overfishing by Chinese of the West Philippine Sea, how much damages, if any, can we demand from China, and how do you propose to collect the damages? I think this was partially answered. No, but anyway, we would like to hear this directly answered. Sir? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
in the hearing of the tribunal, we were able to demonstrate that China destroyed methodically the coral reefs in the West Philippine Sea. The destruction was massive, especially in their construction of artificial islands. The destruction is also caused by their illegal fishing. The annual cost was estimated by the UP Maritime Institute to be approximately US $700 million a year.
All right. Next question, sir. What about the Vietnam and Malaysia? What shall we do with the islands they occupy the West Philippine Sea?
Yeah, the arbitral tribunal outcome defined entitlements for everyone. Since Vietnam and Malaysia are friendly states, we suggest either bilateral or multilateral negotiations take place.
Thank you. This is a follow-up question. Would you be in favor of bilateral or joint agreement with China? How about with Vietnam and or Malaysia?
I think that you will agree with me when I say that China is a bully, and this behavior manifests itself notably in bilateral engagements. It is best to deal with them on a multilateral basis.
Okay, thank you. On the issue Isambayan, can you tell us who among the candidates you prefer or who has the better chances of being chosen as president? Uh, well, this seems to be a question far out from our topic today, but we leave our guest speaker to answer this or beg off from answering it. Sir?
Yeah, I will answer it. At Isambayam, part of the process in selecting a singular candidate for president, there are the standards of character, competence, commitment, past performance, and winnability that will be applied. We hope that the process in its entirety will produce for us the best possible candidate. I don't know who that is, but I think when the process has been completed, I think you can be confident that we have selected the best possible candidate.
Okay, thank you. Do you think that given Chinese interest in the West Philippine Sea, do you think China will intervene in our elections? And what about the United States?
Yeah, I don't know if you're aware, but I also just got this information, part of this information yesterday. There's a lot of talk in Australia and even the US about interferences in their electoral domestic affairs. Since the Philippines is at the center of South China Sea disputes, it stands to reason that the Philippines will also be targeted. Duterte had stated that Xi Jinping gave him the assurance that he will protect our president if there's a move to bring him down, period. In the context of that of the last election, what exactly did we can come to our own conclusions on that.
Thank you. In your opinion, how different is the Biden administration as compared to the Trump administration in the US policy over the West Philippine Sea and over its relationship with the Philippines?
Um, the way we see it is the institutional and bipartisan consensus of the US is to deal with China as both a competitor and a threat. This is a new development in the US. And this consensus must be taken seriously by the US. Broadly speaking, the objective of China is to dominate, while that of the United States is to promote the rule of law. And so that remains, and that that will drive the activities and the policies towards
Okay, thank you. We have heard presidential spokesperson Harry talk about the West Philippine Sea and the issues surrounding it. Are any of his pronouncements considered as a statement of public policy, considering that he's an alter ego of the president?
Yeah, I'll answer that very quickly. In short, the presidential spokesperson must be careful in terms of what he says in public. He can bind the president.
Okay, thank you. That's very unequivocal. I don't know if you're aware of the position made by Ambassador Rosario Manalo, saying that an arbitration was not properly set up. Since the Philippines opted for voluntary arbitration and China did not participate in said arbitration, China is not bound by the July 2016 arbitral award of the arbitration panel. Kindly comment on this, please.
Yeah. The arbitration was fully in accordance with UNCLOS Part 15 and Annex 7. The outcome uh, is now an integral part of international law. The ambassador is therefore completely wrong.
Thank you. Okay, that's also very clear. Next question, sir. President Duterte keeps on declaring in public that China is in possession of the West Philippine Sea. What are the effects of these public declarations made the President on our West Philippine Sea claims and on the arbitral award in our favor?
Uh, it'll be a quick answer. The president's statement can be taken as an admission against Philippine interests. In simple terms, it can be construed as surrendering Philippine territories.
So it could be considered an unconstitutional move by the President, sir. Okay, the next question.
I'll answer that, President.
Uh, it's just sort of a follow-up question in view of your answer.
I think
to that question.
we're assuming that the president's statement is correct. His statement is not correct. That the Philippines, that China is not in full possession of the West Philippine Sea, and that's the crux of his question. In other words, if he says that the situation is China is not in full possession of the West Philippine Sea. If the Philippines takes that attitude, it can be construed by the president saying surrendering Philippine interest. More clear?
Yeah. Thank you. In March this year, next question, sir. Around 220 Chinese vessels believed to be Chinese maritime militia were seen swarming Julian Felipe Reef. Do you think that China is using the same strategy it used in occupying the Mischief Reef in 1995?
Tito, the answer is no. It's a different strategy. I think the strategy of Mischief Reef was like a thief in the night. In the case of Julian Felipe, they are like a thief in daylight that is out to overwhelm.
Okay, that's, I think, very clear. Thank you. How are our neighbors handling the West Philippine Sea dispute? While affirming our boundaries and claims in the West Philippine Sea as recognized by international laws of the seas, are they able to still maximize trade and investment with China?
our neighbors, Tito, are more important, courageous, and more courageous than us in their approach. They are more committed and resolved in their engagement with China. They don't show any vacillations, yet they continue to attract Chinese investments. In Indonesia, they have apprehended and burned Chinese fishing vessels which have been engaged in illegal fishing. They do what they say. They take a position and they do what they say. There's no vacillation on their part. And for that, they're respected by China.
That's clear. Thank you. Social media portrays Duterte as clueless regarding our West Philippine Sea stand in international law permits. Is he really clueless? Is he cognizant of Justice Carpio's findings substantiating our claim?
He, he could be clueless, but we don't think that he is. On the contrary, we think he is deliberate. And this makes it more dangerous because he clearly stands with China.
Okay, that's very clear. Uh, or is Duterte utilizing negotiating tactics to wring out best terms from China, as it seems Indonesia is able to do so?
Well, that's what he's portraying perhaps for the last 4 to 5 years. But we don't see any benefit from that strategy.
Okay. Next question, sir. President Duterte has shown that he is unpredictable. One doesn't know whether he's joking or not. Do you think that this unpredictability of our president does not likewise give comfort to China, that he, referring to Duterte, is a steady ally and friend of China? Perhaps you could answer that first because this seems to be a long question, but sir, probably you could answer the first part of this questioning.
Uh, I think if you probably remember that the president had once before given us a clear manifestation of what he is like when he said that if I make 5 declarations, you can be sure that only 2 of them would be true. You remember that?
Yes.
That's what he said, effectively. Say it again. What he said is, if I make 5 declarations, you can be sure that only 2 of them would be true. Since we don't know which 2 is accurate, we may as well consider that his totality is a falsehood.
Okay, noted that, sir. Let me continue with this question. If President Duterte's latest statement that he will not withdraw our ships from the West Philippine Sea, even if he's killed, is to be believed, do you think that China would also be more cautious in dealing with our president?
Can I ask for a restatement of that question?
Okay, yes, sir. If President Duterte's latest statement that he will not withdraw our ships from the West Philippine Sea, even if he's killed, meaning to say he's taking a strong position, and if this is to be believed, do you think that China would also be more cautious in dealing with our president? I guess this is in a way referring to how Indonesia behaves over China.
Can we reserve that to the end, that question?
Yes, sir. We'll do that. Next question, sir. President Duterte's posturing on the West Philippine Sea might be due to the fact that he could not get a firm and solid commitment from the U.S. Do you think the U.S. should exhibit a more definitive pronouncement to protect and promote Philippine interests in the West Philippine Sea in order to induce President Duterte into abandoning his pro-China stance? Do you also think that President Duterte deliberately says the things he says because he wants to get a firmer commitment from the U.S. and more military aid?
I think over the years, the U.S. has clarified its position in the South China Sea and the West Philippine Sea, as well as their mutual defense treaty with the Philippines. I think that it's our turn to also be clearer in our position. Yet, yes, we need to revisit and see what we can do to push for our MDT, the EDCA, and the VFA. At least two of these are sort of now in limbo.
Okay. Okay, thank you. As one of the conveners of Isang Bayan, do you think this West Philippine issue must be made an election issue in next year's elections for purposes of choosing the next president? But how would we know if the candidate would keep true to or her word as what we had experienced with our incumbent president?
Yeah, I think West Philippine Sea issue should be given primacy as an election issue. As a start, we need to look for a singular candidate who, as I said earlier, will meet the standards of character, competence, commitment, performance, and availability.
Okay, thank you. Noted. Next, sir. To be effective, to what extent should diplomacy be combined with a show of force to force China to vacate the Philippine territories that they occupy?
Yeah, it's a good strategy to combine diplomacy with the show of force to endeavor to compel China to vacate the Philippine territories that they occupy. An excellent diplomatic initiative is to submit our case to the UN General Assembly, as we discussed earlier, and work to compel China to abide by the arbitral tribunal outcome. Based on precedents, which we also talked about Nicaragua versus the United States as an example, this can be done at the same time. We should revisit the earlier strategy of joint patrols with the US and encourage responsible nations to undertake freedom of navigation operations. Justice Conchita Carpio Morales, Justice Tony Carpio, and I will also try to move forward our communication in the International Criminal Court, charging Xi Jinping, Wang Yi, and others for crimes against humanity with regards to our loss of livelihood and food security as a result of China's illegal action.
Okay, thank you, sir. What is our realistic expectations on the result of the diplomatic efforts that we're now undertaking?
Okay, I will. I would ask for this to be the last. We're now in the.
This is the
I have
last.
one more question that's outstanding. Can I have that question now? The one that I did.
Sir,
Then we'll go to the last question.
sir, that's the last question.
Oh.
Or did you want me to go back to the question that you passed up and
Yeah,
say,
I didn't quite understand the question. Could you restate?
this last one, sir?
This one, I will answer this as the last question.
Okay, you'll answer.
But I want the one that I couldn't answer. I want to answer that now if I can.
Okay, let me go back to it, sir. Well, I stand corrected if I'm wrong here, no? If President Duterte's latest statement that he will not withdraw our ships from the West Philippine Sea, even if he's killed, is to be believed, do you think that China would also be more cautious in dealing with our president? I think that's the question that you
Yeah.
preferred for last, or at least for later.
I think at this point, nobody takes seriously what the president says. I think, at the very least, I think China will take that and put it in the standard of the jet ski proposition that was offered by the president earlier.
Okay, I hope that answers the question, no? Of the person who.
Yeah, he has no credibility. Okay.
Uh-huh.
He has no credibility to make such statements.
He has no credibility. Okay, thank you for that comment, Mr. Sir. Okay, going to the last question now. May I repeat it?
Sure.
What is our realistic expectations on the result of the diplomatic efforts that we are now undertaking? Well, there are probably two things here. The first one is what the president had already submitted to the UN, and the we could also mean the civil society groups like yourself, sir, Conchitina, the Justices Conchitina Morales, and also of Justice Antonio Carpio, and perhaps other civil society groups that are now undertaking diplomatic efforts, no, to combine them with yours and those that are similarly sympathizing with your cause, with our cause, sir.
Yeah, I think, thank you for reminding me that there should be a worldview here, Tito. But at the rate our government is handling the issue, there seems to be not much expectation for a positive outcome. Instead of a bilateral approach where China will surely have us for breakfast. That's what happens in a bilateral meeting with China, is they bully you out of the room. Uh, Instead of a bilateral approach where China will surely have us for breakfast, we should be utilizing a multilateral strategy, one that addresses China, not our fellow Filipinos, as an antagonist on West Philippine Sea issues. It must be clear to the world that our government strategy is to distract attention from its more than cozy relationship with our neighborhood bully. Let me read that again. It must be clear to the world that our government strategy is to divert attention from its more than cozy relations with our neighborhood bully by chastising Filipinos who are calling attention to what should be the proper focus.
Sir, that's a laconic answer to a mouthful statement,
Sorry about that. About
to a mouthful uh, answer, you know.
this, it is.
Thank you, sir. All right,
You,
we our question and answer portion here. I think that our guest speaker has graciously answered almost 20 or over 20 questions, which is rare in our regular meetings, sir. But you gamely took on all the questions that could possibly be asked, at least at this point. So thank you very much for this for this indulgence. Uh, so may we now request our president for his mouthful response.
Thank you, PP Tito. Okay, for my president's response. Now, we are all taught that strong fences make good neighbors. Boundaries are set to establish a level of respect between neighbors. But what happens when our rich and powerful neighbor, who poses as our friend, puts up a fence that includes part of our property? How does diplomacy come into play? Now, it is said that diplomacy has existed since the beginning of the human race. The act of conducting negotiations between or among nations at a large scope is essential for the upkeep of international affairs. Among the many functions of diplomacy include preventing war and violence and fortifying relations between and among nations. Without diplomacy, much of the world's affairs would be abolished, international organizations would not exist, and above all, the world would be at a constant state of war. Diplomacy is therefore essential for countries to coexist in harmony. Without it, many nations would not be able to conduct successful negotiations. Yet, it is also a truism that not all countries are built equal. How does a small country like the Philippines negotiate with a superpower nation like China? How does one negotiate with someone who, in an instance, instead of following the agreement for mutual withdrawal from the Scarborough Shoal, reneged on such agreement and instead illegally seized the same from our country? Our esteemed speaker recounted that in 2012, our country withdrew our one or two ships from Scarborough Shoal while China deceitfully breached the US brokered agreement by not withdrawing their more than 30 ships. How do you negotiate with such a powerful country who clearly believes only in the principle, might is right? Now I'm reminded of a true story told by Napoleon Hill about a 5-year-old girl sent by her mother to collect money from a man who owes her. The little girl went to the man's house, knocked on the man's door, and as soon as the man opened the door, the girl said, "Sir, I came to collect from you what you owe my mama." The man told the girl that he didn't have any money and told her to go home. Although she said, "Yes, sir," the girl stood there like she had not heard anything else than a man saying not having any money. Soon the man returned to the door to check if the girl was gone, but she was still there. So he yelled at her and said, "I don't have any money for you, so go home." And the girl again said, "Yes, sir." And yet again, she stood there like nothing had happened. A few minutes later again, the man came checking to see if the girl was gone, but she was still standing there. The little girl has clearly displayed her firm commitment not to go home until she got what her mama sent her to get. She sent a strong message to the man that she is not going to give up demanding for the money the man owed her mother. Eventually, the man walked up to her and gave her the money. I don't know what kind of diplomacy that is, but the little girl went to the man with a definite purpose and with a clear message. She did not leave until she got what was due her mother. Maybe we can all learn from that little girl. Instead of saying, "Well, China has possession over the West Philippine Sea, so we cannot do anything." Or instead of harping on, "We cannot go to war with China," like a mantra. Or just recently, China says there will be trouble if Philippines digs oil in the West Philippine Sea. Or the arbitral award is meaningless. It's just a scrap of paper. Instead of saying all that, perhaps we should start by clearly communicating our message to our neighbor friend that China remains an illegal occupant of Scarborough Shoal, a continuing and open violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Philippines, as our esteemed speaker has articulated. Or, if you prefer our incumbent Secretary Locsin's message, "China, my friend, how politely can I put it? Let me see. Oh, get the bleep out. Sorry, I had to censor a word from the quote. However we put it, let us show to our neighbor friend our determination and definiteness of purpose to get what rightfully belongs to us. The world is watching. Let us show them that we are not surrendering, that we are standing for what is right, and that right is might. On behalf of the Rotary Club of Makati, our lovely aunts, our district governor Chacha Camacho, the other Rotarians from different Rotary clubs in our district, especially to my classmates, the Perfect Vision presidents, our Rotaractors, and all the other guests in attendance, please accept our heartfelt gratitude for taking time and sharing with us your valuable insights on diplomacy and the West Philippine Sea Controversy. Once again, thank you, Ambassador Albert del Rosario. Thank you. And as tokens of our appreciation, we shall be giving you a copy of our 50th anniversary coffee table book, which contains our club's 50 years of community service and fellowship, together with a bottle of red wine for you to enjoy while going through the pages of our book. Once again, thank you, sir.
May I make one last comment, if I may?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sir.
I would like to acknowledge the remarks of President Manzano, and my reaction is bravo. Well said. And I think my humble view is that we should recruit your president to work with the DFA
Thank
and
you, sir.
as officials there.
It will be an honor, sir. Thank you.
Yes, sir. His term is ending on June 30. And by that time, he is at your disposal, sir. Well said. Thank you. Well, I would also like to add as we end and before our president will close, please indulge me by saying we have a primus inter pares among the people really up against China and really pro-Philippines in this West Philippine issue. Also, bravo, sir. Mr. President, would you like to
Yeah.
now,
Before I adjourn this meeting, can I ask everyone to open their cameras or for our picture taking?
Okay, 1, 2. Second window. Third window.
we have still 80 people in
Last
attendance.
window.
We have kept the number constant, sir.
You got me wrong.
Okay, 1, 2. Last. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. This regular meeting of the Rotary Club of Makati is hereby adjourned. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for attending. Thank you, Ambassador Del Rosario. Thank you, PPT.
Thank you.
Yeah.